We're live.
Thank you. Well, councillors and executive team, welcome to our August ordinary meeting of council for 2021. Because of the New South Wales health orders, we're restricted to hold this ordinary meeting via Zoom. For those who are listening online through YouTube, welcome to our ordinary meeting of council. I'd like to start the meeting by acknowledging the Camilla people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and pay my respects to elders both past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal community members who may be listening in online today. And also a welcome to anyone from the media who may be watching, especially as well today. So councillors and executive team, if I could ask you please to bow your head for prayer. Eternal God, our loving Father, we come to thee this day in the name of Jesus Christ, who is the lover of our souls and the saviour of all mankind. May we feel his love and respond to it. May his spirit shine in lives that are darkened by worry, doubt, or fear. Strengthen and guide those who are trying to do what is right. Make it plain to them. Make us more mindful of the needs of our fellow men and less absorbed in the selfish concerns, that Christ may approve and bless what we do here this day. We ask these blessings in his name. Amen. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to our bereavements in the Shire of Ganondorf between the 22nd of July and the 25th of August. And councillors, we mourn the loss of Beverly Marion Joan Dickey, Barbara Joan Woodlands, Patrick William Cruz, Michael John Fogarty, Phineas David Herden, David Glenn Beasley, Peter Rowan Gibbons, Betty Violet Sampson, Joan Catherine Sampson, John Kevin Joseph Dunn, Viola Octave Marr, Marlene Therese Sampson, Brian Smith, Michael Arthur Bell, Nathan Charles Markle, Helen Mary Morrissey, Donald Russell McDonough, Margaret Joan Motive, Sebastian Robert Shortis, and Ronald Lloyd Cheatham. Councillors, executive team and friends listening online, if I could ask you to please join with me for 1 minute silence to pay respect to the deceased as we extend our condolences to the family and friends of those deceased. Thank you. Thank you. We'll now move on to our next item on the agenda, councillors, and that is those of apologies and present. We have all elected members joining into the ordinary meeting for August via Zoom, and also our executive team. So we'll move on to the next item, which is confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting that was held the ordinary meeting for July that was held on the 21st of July, and I'd like to call on an elected member to move. They'd be drawn correct. Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Hook and seconded by Councillor Fuller. I'll now put that motion. All in favour? By hand, please. I'll call that unanimously supported. Thank you. We'll now move on to the next item, which is item 6, declarations of interest. We have received several declarations of interest. Ms. Markey, if I could ask if you could maybe put that on the screen, please, for elected members to see, and for myself to read out before I call for any more declarations of interest. Councillors, you'll see we have received from myself, Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Hook declarations of interest in relation to items in the business paper. I'll now call for elected members and executive team if there are any further declarations of interest. Last call, any declarations of interest? Okay, so I'll read out those declarations. So for myself, I have a declaration in relation to item 9.3, which is the naming of the second road over rail bridge. It's a significant non-pecuniary, and the reason I've declared that interest is I am the president of the Ganondorf Rotary Club, who have made a submission to the Transport for New South Wales. On item 11.1, which is the business partner program round 1, I have also declared an interest which is significant but non-pecuniary as one of the businesses named as being potentially successful of funding as a competitor of a business that I own. And item 16.1, which is a closed item in relation to the Ganondorf Sale Yard redevelopment upgrade. I've declared an interest which is pecuniary as I own a company that may tender for future works packages as part of the Sale Yard development upgrade in the future. Councillor O'Keefe has declared an interest of 9.3 second road over rail project, significant but non-pecuniary, as he was the president of a community organisation which made a submission being considered. Also item 12.1, which proposed partial road closure at Camilla Road, significant non-pecuniary, as a colleague and friend of, I can't quite read it all, a colleague and friend of, I'm not sure if I'm able to move the screen there.
Private landholder.
Of a private landholder. Apologies for that, just the screen has covered some of the wording. Councillor O'Keefe, you'll be leading the Zoom meeting for both of those items?
Yeah, that is correct.
Thank you. Councillor Hook has declared an interest in 9.3 second road over rail project, less than significant non-pecuniary, as his wife submitted a name for consideration, and he will be leading the meeting for item as it's determined and debated. And Councillor Hook has also declared interest in item 10.4, request for sponsorship for IMAX. It's a significant non-pecuniary as he holds a position of chair of IMAX committee and will be leading the meeting for discussion and determination of that item. So they are there for the declarations in relation to the business paper. And we'll now move forward. Items 7 and 8, which is community presentations and Merrill Minute. There's no item there for discussion in the agenda. So we'll move straight on to item number 9, which is the General Manager's reports. And I'll call on Mr. Groth to detail his recommendations, I should say, for his first item, which is the 4th quarter project progress report. Thank you, Mr. Groth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, good evening, councillors and public. The first item is the 4th quarter June project progress report for 2021 and simply recommends that it's received and noted. Please for any questions to be addressed to the relevant officer.
Thank you, Mr. Groth. I'll call for an elected member to move the recommendation and become a motion. Thank you. Councillor Luke has moved it and seconded by Councillor Swain. Councillor Luke has moved the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I now call for elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against that motion. Councillor Swain is the seconder of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If there are no further questions or comments, then councillors, I'll put this motion by show of hands, please. All in favour? All that unanimously supported. Thank you. Move on to item 9.2, which is the 2020-21 operational plan budget revote or carry forwards, and I'll hand back to Mr. Groth to detail his recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The recommendation's in two parts: that the adjustments to the budget allocations, including transfers to and from restricted assets as listed in the attachments to the report, be adopted. And secondly, that the charges to the 2021-22 operational plan as contained in the report and attachments be budget allocations for revote carried forward and future works be adopted.
Thank you, Mr Groff. And Councillor Hasler has moved that motion and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Hasler, do you wish to speak?
Only to the point of saying that this year, along with the last probably 2 years, has been a big year for council's operations, but there is a long list there listed under B of projects, and I hope that most of those are completed in the forthcoming year, and we don't have a list of that length at the end of next year.
Thank you, Councillor Hasler. Do I have a councillor who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Moses, as the seconder of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
That be the case, then I'll put the motion by show of hands. All in favour? Unanimously supported once again. Thank you. Moving right along. Item 9.3, we have declarations from Councillor Chaffey, Hook and O'Keefe, and we three councillors will now be leading the Zoom meeting, and I'll hand over to the General Manager, Mr Groff, to go through the process of selecting a chair. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. With those councillors having an interest, having left the chamber, is there a nomination for a councillor to take the chair?
I nominate Councillor Hasler.
I nominate Councillor Luke.
Councillor Hasler, do you accept the nomination?
Sorry, I nominated Councillor Luke.
And so you're not accepting a nomination, Councillor Hasler?
No, I'm not.
Councillor Luke, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Any other nominations, councillors? There being no further nominations, I declare Councillor Luke elected chair.
Thank you very much, Mr General Manager. And I'd now like you to, as we address item 9.3, outline your recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation is that Council recommend the names to the Transport for New South Wales as per option, and an option to be selected as included in the report.
Thank you. I would actually now call on Councillor Owen Hasler, has his hand up. Councillor Hasler, would you like to move the motion and put in some names? Would you like to unmute your microphone, Councillor Hasler? Still can't hear you, Councillor Hasler. Councillor Hasler, you're actually on mute. Councillor Hasler?
Am I unmuted?
We didn't hear
now?
any of that.
Am I unmuted? I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can now, thank you.
Sorry. Option B is the option I'd like to include in the motion wording as put forward by the General Manager. So it would read that Council recommend the names to Transport for New South Wales as per option B. But in doing so, I just want to make clarification from the General Manager that putting forward two names is appropriate. In reading the geographical names board, etc., which doesn't apply apparently to bridges, it says in the document, is it appropriate that we nominate two people?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, Councillor Hasler, thanks for the question. It is appropriate. The Transport for New South Wales has asked us to do one of two things: either nominate one Indigenous name or an Indigenous name and a European name. And then Transport for New South Wales will make a determination based on our recommendation.
Thanks, Mr General Manager. So following that explanation, can I have somebody to second Councillor Hasler's motion? Councillor Fuller, you're seconding the motion? Thank you. Now, as the mover of that motion, Councillor Hasler, would you like to speak to that motion?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, I will. I think it's most appropriate to nominate those two people. I had in mind the other option would be to nominate Kumbo Gunnerar, who is better known to us by the Red Chief. But I think there is a strong push from the community to have people that we, or many of us, have had association with or recognise in the last century in Gunnedah. And consequently, Mr. Reg Talbot would be one. I think it's most appropriate to have an Indigenous person in the name because of a number of reasons. One, of course, is that some 13% of Gunnedah's population identify as Indigenous, and yet we have very few, or if any, public buildings, to my knowledge, which are named after an Indigenous citizen or former citizen. Secondly, we just went through in the agenda item 1, the acknowledgement of country, and that is because it's recognising the original inhabitants of this area, the Gomeroi people, or Gamilaroi, some people refer to it as. So I think having an Indigenous person, Mr. Reg Talbot, who is well known in the Indigenous community, who, as well as in the wider community, for his work in setting up a number of Indigenous organisations, seeking employment for Indigenous workers, and in other aspects of promoting the culture of the Gomeroi people. So that's on one side. And of course, recommendation 21 of the Geographical Names Board says that where possible, Indigenous names should be included in naming such namings of public facilities like this. So it seems to me that that fits all of those, ticks all those boxes. At the same time, we did have a number of people from our community nominate people, other people. But one of them was Dr. Colin Anderson, who, from all the information I have gained from reading that document and talking to people, and even though I arrived in Gunnedah 50 years ago, just after he ceased practice in, I think, 1967, he was very well known and respected in the community, and a member of many organisations, the Board of the Services Club, the RSL sub-branch, and a foundation member of, I think, the Rotary, the Show Society, the band, and delivered 3,500 babies, they tell me, which is a marvellous contribution by a doctor, and spent 47 years in our community practising. So I think all of those are well deserve to be recognised, as well as being on the director, I think, of Gunnedah Coal, and also instrumental in the Civic Theatre being built. So it would seem to me that meets the criteria of a non-Indigenous member of our community. I know a lot of people, and I had a great deal of sympathy with the name of Nancy Small, but I think in comparison to the others, in terms of their wider activities across the community and the length of time, I mean, I'd like to think that council would give serious consideration going forward to the naming of the new koala facility that we propose as being, if the family were happy to do so, that would be something that could, Nancy's name could be put to. But anyway, I'll leave that to future councillors to discuss. So I think it's most appropriate, Madam Chair, that the two names, Reginald Talbot and Doc Anderson, go forward as the preferred names of this council.
Thanks, Councillor Haslett. Is there a councillor who would like to ask a question or speak against the motion?
I'm going to be speaking against the motion.
Yes,
for the reasoning of I think it devalues the naming of the bridge if there's two entities being considered in partnership. I would much rather have a specific project called the original Talbot Bridge. My feeling is that I would like it to be the Doc Anderson Bridge, and then look for something really important for the regional Talbot Memorial. I feel very much disappointed that if we're going to be ending up with two people as representative of this one large overpass, that we'll never have an opportunity of having something like that again. The amount of work that Dr. Anderson did for our community, not only in serving overseas in the military, but also serving his fellow soldiers by his medical work, and then coming back and providing such loyal and committed and dedicated service over so many, many, many years to so many different varying sectors of our community. So I'll be voting against this recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Swain. Is there a councillor who would like to speak in favour of the motion? Any further councillors that would like to speak against the motion? Oh, sorry, was that you, Councillor?
Yeah, I will be supporting the motion with the two names going forward. I know that Doc Anderson, I grew up here. He was a wonderful person, and also I will be supporting the two names. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fuller. Is there a further councillor who would like to speak against the motion? Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask a question to Mr. Groth, if I may, please, Chairperson. Is like, if we put the two names in, the bridge is only going to be called one of them, isn't it? It's not going to have both names allotted to it.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, Councillor Campbell, my understanding is that Transport for New South Wales will make a determination and select one name from the two that are put forward.
May I just clarify, Mr. General Manager, but if we actually put forward a double-barrelled name, that will be an acceptable naming?
Madam Chair, as Councillor Hasler commented before, there's some peculiarities with regard to bridges. They're not quite captured by the GMB naming policy, but they are captured. There's a suggestion that they should follow the same approach as road naming. So there's two documents that the Transport for New South Wales have put forward as guidance. One of the, or a couple of the criteria are the name must not be more than 50 characters or 3 words, 50 characters in length or more than 3 words, including the, in the case of roads, including the type of road, so street or avenue and so forth. So if you apply the same convention, I would expect there would be enough capacity for 2 names and bridge at the end of it. So unless council was to put forward a combination of the 2 names, bridge that met the 50 character requirement, then that may be acceptable to Transport for New South Wales.
So may I clarify, Mr. General Manager, does option B, without the first bridge, does that fulfil, do you believe, the requirements?
Madam Chair, option B would give Transport for New South Wales the option of either naming it Reginald Talbot Bridge or Doc Anderson Bridge. If you wanted to put forward a combination name, then we should make that clear in our nomination or recommendation to Transport for New South Wales. However, I repeat that the request from Transport for New South Wales, and it's up to council whether you recognise the request, but the request was to put forward either an Indigenous name or a European name. So I'm not sure what the response from Transport for New South Wales would be if you combine the 2 names.
All right, well, that's
Madam Chair, with that explanation, that wasn't clear, I don't think, to myself and to other councillors before, and with my seconder's approval, I'm happy to try and get a compromise which we can get as many to support as possible. I'm happy to either delete the bridge, the first bridge, as you suggest, and have and Doc, so the both are mentioned in the name, or delete the second name if we have to only put one name forward. I'm trying to satisfy the many people that nominated both Reginald Talbot and Doc Anderson in the submissions. If we can't do that and have a dual name bridge, I believe we should just leave it as Reginald Talbot Bridge, as per the recommendation of number 21 of the Geographical Names Board, which is Aboriginal names are encouraged as the name to be used for any future feature that currently does not have a name recognised by the board. But to try and satisfy both, I'm happy to see both names go forward as one name for the bridge, or else if that isn't acceptable, I'm happy to change my motion to try and make that clearer if you'd prefer.
Well, it probably is better to actually change the motion. Is it possible, Mr. General Manager, to put forward in the motion our first preference, or if this was Councillor Hasler's desire in his motion, to put option B followed by option A, should option B be unsuitable?
Madam Chair, that's certainly possible. So it's in the councillor's hands if you wish to put forward a option and say that if that option can't be delivered by Transport for New South Wales, that you would prefer a second option be delivered. That certainly can be communicated to Transport for New South Wales if it's the wish of the meeting.
Well, with my seconder's approval, I would change it then to the motion to be that the preferred name for the bridge is the Reginald Talbot and Doc Anderson Bridge. However, if that is not possible, that we would prefer it be named the Reginald Talbot Bridge.
Thanks, Councillor Hasler. Councillor Fuller, are you happy with that amended motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'll go with it. Yes, thank you.
Miss Markey, is it possible for you to write that motion out with Councillor Hasler's change?
Just Madam Chair, it just should be Reginald Talbot and Doc Anderson Bridge, please. Yes.
And remove
and delete the first bridge, please. No, not that one.
After Talbot.
The second bridge. Yes. However, this is not that the bridge be named. Yes.
Thank you,
Yes.
Councillor Hasler. And Councillor Fuller, you are happy with that wording?
Thank you.
Now, from this point forward, we will actually now go and possibly get back to you, Councillor Campbell. You did have, you were speaking last when these issues came up, I think. Would you like to speak for or against this motion?
I'll be voting against the motion because if it's going to be a single name, I'd prefer Doc Anderson Bridge.
Thank you. Is somebody else that's going to speak for the motion? Do I have any other speaker who would actually like to speak against the motion? No, that being the case, I will put the motion. Those in favour.
Can I just have my right of reply?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, I'm not practised at this, Councillor Hasler. Thank you for butting in. Your right of reply, Councillor Hasler.
Yes, well, I think I'll just reiterate what I said before. I mean, my preference is to acknowledge both individuals, one who did a significant role in our community, both for the Indigenous community and the non-Indigenous community over a lot of years, and there were many nominations for him to be the name. On the other hand, we received a lot of nominations from other members of the community, including family, who would like to see Doc Anderson. So I think a joint name, if we can achieve it, would be appropriate. But if it has to get back to one, the fact that the Geographical Naming Board recommends that it be an Indigenous name if we don't have any other name for the feature, and the fact that this community has significant Indigenous populations and very little features, public facilities named after them, which seemed to me to be appropriate to have Reginald Talbot be the name put forward as our preferred.
Thanks, Councillor Hasler. Now, would anybody, or if we could actually see that motion again, please, Miss Markey, so we know what we're voting on. Thank you. That the motion is that the preferred name for the bridge is the Reginald Talbot and Doc Anderson Bridge. However, if this is not acceptable, that the bridge be named the Reginald Talbot Bridge. Now, if you want to now close your screen so I can see everybody, can I have a show of hands of those in favour of that motion? 1, 2, 3. I will be in favour of it as well. So I declare the motion carried. And at this stage, I will ask that the Ms McLean get the absentee councillors back into the room, and we'll hand the chair back to Councillor Chaffey. As a little bit of levity while we're waiting, I was going to say we could actually have the bridge named in one direction, one name, and the other direction, the other name, but I do realise that that's a bit crazy.
We'll just wait for Councillor Hook to turn to the meeting. Councillor Fuller, can I ask that you put your mute button on, please?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
No problem. Welcome back, Councillor Hook. If you could please mute, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Councillors, we'll now move on to our next item on the agenda, which is item 9.4, investments, and I'll hand back to Mr. Groff to detail the recommendation before you.
Councillors, pleased to commend the report and take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Groff. I'll now call for elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor Campbell, seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Campbell, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Moses is a second to the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Unanimously supported. Thank you. We'll move right along. Thank you, Mr. Groff, for your contribution to our Zoom August ordinary meeting. We'll now move on to item number 10, which is the Director of Corporate and Community Services reports. And we have several of those, so I'll call on Mr. Foreman to detail his recommendation, starting with the first item, which is Deputy Mayoral term.
Good afternoon, councillors. The first item relates to the Deputy Mayor term, with 3 options outlined for council to pursue. Should council determine to hold elections for the Deputy Mayoral position, I'll have to provide advice on how that may occur, given it will be much more complex than normal to do it over the virtual format. But at this point, I'll take that on notice. I'll provide a response if that is the way council determines to go.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Now, councillors, if I could ask if I have an elected member who has a motion to put forward. Councillor Swain, your hand's up.
Yes, I'll move point number 2, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Swain. So point 2 is determined by a resolution that the term of the Deputy Mayor should coincide with that of the Mayor. Do I have a seconder to that proposed motion? Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe has seconded that motion. Councillor Swain, do you wish to speak to the motion?
The report clarifies that. It's placed us in a difficult position, but I think this is the easiest way out of it.
Thank you, Councillor Swain. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering whether, because of the nuances of all these words, and whether Mr. Foreman could advise, would point number 2 that Councillor Swain has moved be better off saying that this term of the Deputy Mayor should coincide with that of the Mayor, this rather than the?
I don't think it would make any difference, Councillor Luke.
Fair enough, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe is the seconder of the motion. Do you wish to speak? Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a further question or speak against the motion before I put the motion? With the case, I put the motion. All in favour? Unanimously supported. Thank you. Moving on to the next item, which is item 10.2, meeting dates for ordinary meetings and audit committee. I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The second item deals with adjustment of our meeting schedule, given that we've got another few months with the change of the election. The recommendation is that the information be received and noted, and the proposed meeting schedule up until November 21 be endorsed, and that an audit committee meeting be held on Wednesday, the 20th of October.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I have elected member. Thank you. Councillor Hook has moved that recommendation. Now becomes a motion, and Councillor Fuller has seconded. Councillor Hook, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I have elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against that motion. Councillor Hasler.
On page 45, Mr. Chairman, the last paragraph talks about that it's anticipated the General Manager will call an extraordinary election. I don't think that's an extraordinary election, isn't it? It's an extraordinary meeting that he's going to be calling where there will be elections.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct, Councillor Hasler. It's a typo. It should say extraordinary meeting.
Thank you.
Councillor Fuller, as the seconder to that motion, do you wish to speak? Do I have any further questions or comments, or councillor would like to speak against the motion before I put the motion? Be the case, I put the motion. All in favour? Unanimously supported. Thank you. Item 10.3, which is 2017 to 22 delivery program and 2019-20 operational plan, is the next item, which is 10.3, as I said. So I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman now to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The delivery program operational plan progress report is presented for the information of councillors, with the recommendation being that the report be received and noted.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. And it's moved by Councillor Hasler, seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Hasler, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move it because I wish to ask some questions. So if I can go ahead with the questions, I'd appreciate that.
You may.
Number 25.0917, the Simpson Bridge, nearly 4 years. Was that going to make history at the time that we complete that one? The second question relates to 3.11-18E. Please remind me which land is referred to, and has there been a report in relation to that, as stated in the document?
Councillor Hasler, we may deal with one at a time, or it might be difficult to remember all of your questions.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Foreman?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the Simpsons Bridge one's probably better directed to the Director of Infrastructure Services.
Thank you to Councillor Hasler for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor. It's entirely possible it may make a record, Councillor Hasler, but it's not for lack of trying of staff. It's one of those ones where ideally these sorts of things get sorted out before the project commences, but unfortunately in this case that didn't occur. We are working with the property owner in order to progress the matter, and we'll be forwarding the matter on through Department of Crown Lands at the appropriate time.
Thank you. In relation to 3.11/18E, the land in question and the report, has there been such? It's on the 15th, the 11th, 2018.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, are we perhaps asking questions of the wrong item number? I could have a technical lag issue, but are we on item 3 of Mr. Foreman's report?
Which is the delivery and operational plan?
Yes, and again, I could be wrong, but I believe Councillor Hasler is asking
No,
questions of the outstanding
register.
resolution register, which is about 3 items away.
I'm a bit ahead of myself.
It's better than being behind yourself, which I was very worried I was going to be exposed of being.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Moses is second of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Be the case, I put the motion. All in favour? Against? Unanimously supported. Thank you. Next item, we have a declaration by Councillor Hook. I'll ask Councillor Hook to please leave the Zoom meeting. Confirmation on my screen, Councillor Hook has left the meeting. So we'll move on. This next item, 10.4, is a request for sponsorship from IMEX. And I'll hand back to Mr Foreman to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Council previously resolved to support this year's IMEX event, but that can't be held now and has been postponed to next year given the pandemic. The recommendation is that Council's contribution and sponsorship for the conduct of the IMEX event, originally planned to be held in 21, be now applied to the 2022 event, given the recent postponement of the event.
Thank you, Mr Foreman. Do I have an elected member who'd like to move that? Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe has moved that recommendation to now become the motion and seconded by... Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor O'Keefe, would you wish to speak to the motion?
Mr Mayor, just to say that I suspect our sponsorship, unfortunately, due to COVID, may be needed more than ever when this event rolls around next year.
Thank you. Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Swain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just a bit bamboozled here. In one place it says council has already paid that 7,000 cash sponsorship towards the event. So was that towards this year's, or does that mean that because we've paid that, we'll let that just go through to next year's? Or could it just be explained, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, Council's already paid the cash sponsorship, but given the event can't proceed, they'll hold that and put it towards next year's event.
I was hoping it would be. Thank you.
Councillor Luke is the seconder of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a further question or speak against the motion? Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Declare the motion carried. Mr McLean, if you could ask Councillor Hook to rejoin us, please. Welcome back, Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I will mute.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our next item, which is item 10.5, policy review. I'll hand back to Mr Foreman to detail that recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This item deals with the ongoing review of Council's policies. The recommendation is that policies identified in the attached table be formally retired.
Thank you, Mr Foreman. Can I have an elected member to move that recommendation? Becomes the motion. Councillor Luke, seconded by Councillor Campbell. Councillor Luke, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against. Councillor Campbell is second on the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
For the case, I put the motion. All in favour? Declare that motion carried. Moving on, last item for Mr Foreman is item 10.6, outstanding resolution register. Is moved by Councillor Hasler and seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor Hasler, I'm sure you'd like to speak to this motion. And you're on mute. Councillor Hasler, you're on mute.
3.11 18E, the land in question and whether there is a report has been provided.
Thanks, Councillor Hasler. Mr Mayor, I can take that question if you like. We did put a report to Council as per part 1 of that resolution that we commenced the negotiation, but there's been nothing to report since. As the comment states, the negotiations have stalled. We are still in ongoing discussions with potential developers for the development that was outlined in workshops back at that time, but nothing else has progressed, and that's why there's been no further report.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Next one's 10.04/18. It says discussions are recommenced in the interest of reaching a conclusion to this proposal. Who are the discussions with, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor, that comment relates to the previous discussions that were held with the Rotary Club of Ganondorf when they put forward an application which was unsuccessful.
Okay, thank you. The next one is 2.06/21. I can just report there that needs to be upgraded. Their new concrete pad and rock has been installed, and the organisation Pilgrimage Projects is looking for an October 14th, 15th date for the event, when the former Governor-General Sir Peter Cosgrove is available, but of course that will be very much determined by whether COVID causes it to be delayed yet again. If not, it will go till after Anzac Day next year, which is some time off. My last question relates to the business, to the 12.06/20, which refers to the CMCA proposal. Given today's notification of development provided to councillors, is it likely that we will have a decision before the next council meeting, or because this is most likely to be determined by staff rather than have to come to council, Mr Johns?
Just have to give me 1 second, Councillor Hasler. That resolution number again, please.
12.06/20.
Sorry, Councillor Hasler, I'm just having trouble finding that. Is that on page 71?
Page 59, with respect to the CMCA.
There's
sorry.
two references to the thing in.
Yep, okay. Yeah, so Councillor Hasler, that's essentially with the department at the moment, and I don't believe anything would come back to council for that purpose. If you're referring to the additional permitted use in the LEP.
Yes, it was the notice was hereby given by Mr Hudson to us about a application today.
That may refer to the application to amend or to modify the original application to allow for the new permitted use. Depending if we get objections from the community, that would be the determinant of whether it would come to council. I think that would be right.
Thank you. That's all my questions, Mr Chairman.
We have elected member who'd like to ask a further question or speak against the motion. Councillor Fuller is the second of the motion. Do you wish to speak? Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Declare that motion carried. Thank you, Mr Foreman. Moving on, item 11. I have a declaration in relation to this item of a business partner program, so I'll be leaving the Zoom meeting now and handing over to the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Hook, for the discussion, debate and determination of this item.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll just check for a moment to make sure that you have left the meeting. So I believe that's the case. Councillors, item 11.1, which is 2021-22 Business Partner Program Round 1. And I hand over to Mr. Johns to outline his recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and through you, councillors. This report, as you would have read, seeks endorsement of the Business Partner Program Advisory Group. They've made a recommendation to council in relation to the provision of 7 grants to the tune of $29,000 in round 1 of 21-22 Business Partner Program.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Councillor Fuller, you're moving the motion, and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Fuller, you wish to speak to the motion? You're on mute.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's gone through and it's explained well, and I'm happy with the decision that the whole of the committee made. I think it went out very well for everybody that was involved. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Do I have anybody who wishes to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Moses has seconded to the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, that being the case, then I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. The motion is carried, and we ask the Mayor to return us to the Zoom meeting. Welcome back, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so we're all here. Thank you. We'll now move on to our next item on the agenda, which is item 11.2, Draft Ganondorf Shire Economic Development Strategy. And I'll hand back to Mr. Johns to detail that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and through you, councillors. This report seeks endorsement of the Draft Economic Development Strategy 2022 to 2026, and also the themes and directions paper that is read in conjunction with that strategy. And you will note in the recommendation, we have changed it per our discussion in the workshop early today, that the document will be changed in line with councillors' requests in that workshop. So yeah, that will be done prior to going on exhibition for 28 days.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I call for, thank you, Councillor Hook has moved that motion and seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Hook, do you wish to speak to the motion as mover?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm excited in bringing this motion forward to Council's endorsement. I think it's a very, very well-constructed document. It's taken some time in the making, and really excited to see it go out into the public forum. And I hope that it engenders a lot more discussion, because it's very, very important for the future development and direction of our community. And I commend this motion to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor O'Keefe, as the seconder of the motion, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly to echo Councillor Hook's thoughts, but really congratulate the team for what's been a lot of work. It's been a focus area of this council to work in that space and work on the strategy, and we've got a much more accessible and workable document to really go and drive the future of our economy.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Are there any further questions or comments, councillors, before I put the motion? No, then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Again, unanimously supported. Thank you. We'll move on to, thank you, Mr. Johns, for your participation. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 12, Starting with 12.1 partial, Councillor O'Keefe, you have a declaration in relation to this item. Please, if you could leave the Zoom meeting. Thank you. Let the record show Councillor O'Keefe has left the Zoom meeting. So this item is a proposed partial road closure of Camilla Road, and I'll hand to Mr. Bartlett as the Director of Infrastructure Services to detail the recommendation before you, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. The purpose of this report is to seek Council's endorsement to proceed to close and dispose of part of Camilla Road.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. I'll now call for elected member to move that recommendation. Thank you. Councillor Hook has moved the recommendation. It now becomes the motion. If I get a seconder to that motion. Thank you, Councillor Moses. Councillor Hook, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only to say that I think it makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Moses, the second of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Being the case, I put the motion on in favour. Declare that motion carried. Thank you. Ms. McLean, if you could ask Councillor O'Keefe to please rejoin the Zoom meeting. Welcome back, Councillor O'Keefe.
It's fantastic to be here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, our next item, thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Our next item is item 13, which is reports to committees. We have one, which is the Audit Committee meeting minutes that were held on the 21st of July. I'll now call for elected member to move that. Thank you, Councillor Campbell, and seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor Campbell, do you wish to speak at all in relation to the audit meeting before I put the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's
Are there any questions?
pretty broad and direct to the point.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments before I put this motion? Councillor Fuller, do you wish to speak to the motion? For the case, I'll put the motion on in favour. Okay, unanimously supported. Items 14 and 15, there are no business in our ordinary meeting. The next item is a closed meeting. Can I please call for elected member to move that we move into closed recess? Thank you, Councillor Fuller and Councillor Campbell have moved that. I'll now put that motion. All in favour? Declare that carried. Now I have a declaration in relation to this item, 16.1. which is a General Manager's report to closed. I'll be leaving the Zoom meeting and handing to the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Rob Hook, for guidance through the conversation and through to the determination of this item on closed. And then I'll rejoin the meeting to read out the resolution.
Councillors, I note that the Mayor has left the meeting. So we have a determination here for...
Mr. Hook, Councillor Hook, can we just get confirmation